Okay, our next panel is called Building Back Stronger, the Importance of Destination Resilience for Long-Term Sustainability. Now, tourism can be a driving force for economic recovery from the pandemic and can also play a leading role in regenerative initiatives for biodiversity, social inclusion, and communities. Now, to succeed at both, we must be proactive. Now, today we have an experienced sustainability specialist, a professional architect, and over 7 years of experience working in Southeast Asia, and Africa. Please give a round of applause for our next moderator, Pavnesh Kumar, Sustainability and Social Responsibility Program Head of PATA.
Hi everyone. I hope you are not a bit exhausted because this is going to be an thrilling and enriching experience. So I bet you must have heard the word sustainability from 9 a.m. till 5 p.m. at least about 1,000 times, give or take a couple of hundred. But the point is, whenever we talk about sustainability, we forget one thing. As a great architect once said, without a strong foundation, you cannot build anything, be it a building, a destination, an organization, or an individual character. The foundation of sustainability is resilience. Now, I get this a lot whenever we talk about resilience, that isn't it just about having recovery from COVID-19, but it's already gone. So why are we still talking about resilience? So let me explain in very simple words. Any event in your life as a destination, as an individual or a company can be simply categorized into 3 categories. It's the known, you know. It's the known unknown. You know it's going to happen, but you don't know when it's going to happen. Example, if you live in an earthquake-prone area, you know that earthquake is bound to happen, but you just don't know when. And the third category is the unknown unknown. You don't know what's going to happen, and you don't know when it's going to strike you down. So what resilience helps us to do is not only cater for the knowns, but to help us identify and prepare for the known unknowns while keeping in mind and building a strong foundation to tackle the events that are unknown. So with that remark, I'd like to call on stage my fellow panelists. Okay, Mareike from, sorry about that, yeah. She is the advisor for Global Initiative of Disaster Management from GIZ. I'd also like to invite Stephen Schipani and Jessie on the stage, please. So we have very carefully selected our panelists for this particular discussion. We have specialists from disaster risk management, we have from the private sector and the tourism sector. And now we are going to bombard them. Just kidding, we are just going to give them one simple question, but it is going to be very, very empowering discussion. So my first question to you, Mareike, is what is the synergy between disaster risk management and resilience?
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for having me here on this panel, and also thank you to PATA for actually putting this topic of destination resilience at the forefront of some of the discussions during this annual summit. I think it's not only a very timely discussion, but it's also crucial that we are actually going to talk about it and also take action. So not just having discussions, thinking about it, but also identify what can we actually do to build resilience in our destinations. So for the question, what is the synergy between DRM and destination resilience? I mean, I could probably talk about that for like a one-day workshop in order to make people understand what exactly the synergies are and how destinations can benefit from ideas that have been produced in the disaster risk management community. But I just keep it very short, and I would say DRM is providing, or disaster risk management can provide a lot of research tools, tested methodologies that can support destinations in understanding the risks that they are facing, the known unknowns, the unknown knowns. I really like the introduction. And they can also help us to manage these risks in a way better way in order to actually ensure that there is economic growth in our destinations. Now, I'm pretty sure some of you are going to think, why should we even talk about disasters? Why should we talk about resilience? The tourism sector, as we heard before as well, is very used to these bumps in the road, and they always manage to come back pretty quick. And there's also a long history of doing really good crisis management, actually. And crisis management, as opposed to disaster risk management, is actually waiting for things to happen. So we are only becoming active the moment something did go wrong already. And what disaster risk management is trying to do is to actually provide tools and ideas how to prepare, how to reduce certain risk before anything ever happens. And I think this is the beauty and also what DRM can really bring to the table, because it's really moving from like a very proactive approach and going away from this reactive approach, waiting for something to go down, and then we see how we can manage after. And maybe a couple of numbers as well, because I heard during the whole day a lot of numbers being tossed around about like growth rates, visitor numbers, etc. So I thought I will bring a couple of numbers as well that are not very well known in this context, I guess. And they are coming from the disaster risk management perspective, because obviously a lot of research is going on what exactly is going to happen in the future, how is it going to look like, what kind of risk are we expecting. And a very bleak sounding report recently came out in 2022, developed by the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. They are looking into these issues, and what they are saying is that by 2030, we can actually expect to experience 1.5 major disasters a day. What does it mean? It means there is going to be an earthquake and half a major flood per day somewhere in the world. So maybe your destination is not going to be hit the first 150 days, but then you might be hit on day 151 and on day 157 during that year. And what does this mean? Because it has obviously a huge economic impact on a destination, because you need to deal with this event then. You need to manage, you need to rebuild, you need to recover. And what DRM is doing in this regard is to really make you understand what are these risks, what can you do, and another number that is coming from this community is $1 in preparedness is saving you $7 in response. So in the end, it's actually like a business decision. It's at the core of your business, and this is also my last point now. Destination resilience shouldn't be handled as an add-on to your business as usual. And a lot of times we hear, but we can't invest in resilience because we don't have money, we don't have financial resources. But what DRM is also telling us, and what we experienced from other sectors, is that it's not about doing additional activities, but it's more about spending the money that you have, investing in a more risk-informed way, taking all this knowledge that you have, like this understanding of risk, into consideration, and really making sure that whatever you are doing, you already thought about the risk, and you are investing wiser and more sustainably. And with this, I think I shared some of the knowledge that we have from the disaster risk management community that might be relevant to you as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that wonderful insight with us. So since we have touched the topic of DRM, now we would like to move to the next discussion topic within this series, and that is touching on the resilience aspect for tourism. So the next question is for you, Stephen. Would you like to explain identifying diverse tourism offers and key challenges faced? But rather than that, I would like to ask you training and capacity building things which we can have in terms of offering to diversify, really diversify the offers.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for the question. I guess it's two questions. So there's one part about the dimension of market diversification for resilience, and the second I understand is about training, how we can train local people to be able to provide the types of services that this new diverse market is after. Before I respond, let me just thank once again Ras Al Khaimah Tourism Development Authority. Fantastic hosting. I think you've made us feel very welcome. It's been a wonderful experience. It's my first time here, in the UAE, besides transporting the airport in Dubai, which I'm hearing a lot from many others. So it's really a wonderful place. I also congratulate Pata on the selection of Ras Al Khaimah for this first in-person Pata annual summit in a couple of years. Because Ras Al Khaimah, as some of you may know, some of our ambassadors in the back of the room, is actually home to one of the greatest travelers of the 15th century. So, we have, his name is Ahmed Ibu Masid. And he is known as the Lion of the Sea because through his navigation skills, through his seafaring skills, he helped to open up this part of the world for travel. Maybe not tourism at that time, but he certainly opened up the world for this part of the world for travel in the 15th century. So now as we reopen again here, I hope we can take away some of these lessons back to our homes and apply them so we can help to reconnect the world more sustainably.
Stephen, sorry to interrupt you just there, but I can't just stop myself. He just provided an offering of tourism, Instead of just marketing as the best destination, he just gave a whole new perspective of an offering. Wonderful job there, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, and I just read a little bit about the history, too, before I arrived. So it was nice to share that. But no, let's get to the question now. Thank you. Is that, okay, this issue of market diversification, right? If we're a large firm or a large tourism development authority, like our host, we have access to a lot of information. So, one of the messages that we heard this morning were that things need to be demand-driven, not so much supply-driven, right? Now, this is with development of facilities, but also development of experiences for our visitors. So, one of the challenges is that if you're a micro-enterprise, or if you're a small enterprise, when you get a little bit larger, you have more resources and more access to information, and you have a staff where you have analysts and others that are able to help pull in some of this market data and help you design new experiences. But for the small mom and pop operations, they often don't have access to this data. And a lot of this data is in the private sector's hands, it's proprietary, and it's expensive to get at that information. So one of the ways I think to help overcome that is there is a role for government and there's a role for private sector associations like PATA to help obtain this information, analyze it, and make it available in a way that's easily understandable and digestible and can be used by these micro and small enterprises because it does have a lot of public goods aspects. If I'm a small tour operator or a restaurant or others and suddenly we have these new tourists or even domestic markets that we didn't have beforehand, I might need a little bit of guidance on what to develop to serve them, to maximize the type of business that I can capture from this market. So I really think that there's a role for government, destination management organizations, tourism ministries to obtain, whether we collect it through our own means or we collect it through second or third party service providers, have good analysts that can provide that information to our different stakeholders of all different sizes so they can use that to develop services that meet the demand of changing markets. The part on the training, we heard a lot about training, and we have vocational training and education where you spend a lot of time in school to get a qualification, and that's great. But there's also many of the micro and small enterprises, they might not have the financial resources or the time to be involved in that type of training activity. So there's been a lot of innovation. Liz, you mentioned some of the smaller programs where you're reaching out to the smaller business associations and individual owners with training. But also I would encourage governments or just educational institutions to be able to chop these types of skill trainings into smaller slices. So if you're a small business, you can send your staff there, perhaps during the down season and others, to be trained. And it's got to be industry relevant training, right? Once again, demand driven, not supply driven, demand driven. If any of us have time to talk with Peter, he's not here now. I wanted to give him a little bit of kudos, but he helped to develop an interesting system, which is also in a couple of other countries. It's in Lao PDR where I work, and that's called a Passport to Success, where they've developed over 100 different modules on many different types of industry relevant service practices that a small business can send their staff to at an affordable cost and get a stamp in their passport. And these stamps, they accumulate and they can move toward an accreditation, toward an academic credential as well, if they choose to stay on that lifelong learning path. So training is important, make it industry relevant, make it affordable and accessible, and recognize that small and medium enterprises, it might only be 2 or 3 employees. So these things really need to be done in a way that considers their time and their resource constraints as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, for sharing that wonderful insight with us. Now, Jessie, we have the last question of the session for you. So since you're from the tourism private sector, we have one question that I always wanted to ask, is that what are the key challenges towards adapting resilience model, and how does it impact long-term sustainability?
Thank you so much. And to echo everyone else's thanks to both Pata and Rastal Khamed for hosting this event. It really has been fantastic, and it's only day 1. So from the private sector perspective, I feel like there are really 3 key areas that we need to think about when we're trying to encourage private sector to invest more in resiliency. But before I get there, I think what's very important is to highlight when we talk about resiliency, it should not be a standalone from resource efficiency or from the broader concept of sustainability, right? That if we're trying to encourage and promote private sector to invest in resiliency, they need to do that hand in hand with resource efficiency. And similarly at the public sector level, when we're building new resilient wastewater, water systems, right? They should also be sustainable. They should also be circular to the extent that they can be, because otherwise we're protecting ourselves. We're adapting perhaps to climate change, but we're not contributing to any mitigation of that climate change issue. So I think we really need to make sure that we're talking about these things together. Okay, now back to my 3 things, which I keep it very succinct for you. So the first is something that both my 2 other panelists mentioned, which is knowledge. I think this is an incredibly important element and something that the public sector can really help support the private sector on, is building the business case for investing in resiliency and resource efficiency. And I think Mareike's example of $1 of investment equals $7 of saving is perfect. Now, let's do that at the industry level, let's do that at the destination level. The second is looking at different policies within the destination that are maybe inhibiting investment. So these could be things like highly subsidized fossil fuels, right, that are inhibiting investment in renewable energies at the private sector level. They could also be high duties on certain types of equipment or materials that are needed to build more resilient or resource-efficient buildings. So these are things that really need to be looked at across the government, not just in the ministries of tourism, because they're often outside of the purview of the Ministry of Tourism. And then the last is access to finance. And this is essential for private sector-led development in this area and investment in this area. And this is even more important as you have many businesses with very limited capital right now coming out of this pandemic. They might have survived, but they don't really have a lot of extra cash. So looking at ways that governments can work with development banks and also local financial institutions to create certain types of lending programs that will support this, as well as to really look at very carefully managed incentives for these types of investments, whether those are tax breaks or tax rebates that can help businesses be able to invest in these areas. So those are my key things: knowledge, policy, regulatory reform, and access to finance. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessie, for that wonderful insight. We still have like 1/4 to 2 minutes left. So let's discuss between the 3 of you, because you are from 3 different domains, but yet the 4 of us, we are talking about resilience. And it was a wonderful perspective, because when we talk about sustainability, when we talk about resilience, more often we think of it like an isolated subject, an isolated topic. And we are as if working in silos, and we're not having the complete picture, the clear picture of the entire sequence. So starting with you, you mentioned that DRM can save a lot of investment, from going to trash. And that can definitely help to cut down the cost that will surely need to be invested in after a disaster has already occurred. So would you say that if there are frameworks, which definitely do exist, to make sure that we can cut down on these kind of destructive expenses, would you suggest that at what stage a destination should be like, okay, now this is the time we should go for it? What is the proper timeline to introduce this kind of concept to destinations?
Right at the beginning, like before you even start developing, like in an ideal world, I mean, this would just be, as I said, like it's core of the business. Like if you want to succeed with your business and you don't consider these risks, and I mean, I'm talking obviously from like a natural hazard perspective and climate risk perspective most of the time. I know there are other risks to consider, but also these kind of risks, like consider them from the start and make sure that they're like an integral part of how you're developing your destination. So right at the start, that's my answer.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. You have been a wonderful audience, and we just have one key takeaway phrase for you today. So, sustainability is not sustainable without resilience. Thank you so much.